The boy stood barefoot on the rough wooden auction block, his small body trembling with fear and cold despite the sun beating down on the dusty square. His wrists were bound with frayed rope, not tight enough to cause pain, but tight enough to remind him that he had no freedom, no voice, no worth in this place. He was perhaps 15, though no one had ever celebrated a birthday for him. His thin frame, hollow cheeks, and wide, uncertain eyes told a story no words could capture. The wind blew dust into his face, and he didn't flinch. He had learned that flinching only invited more cruelty. Still, nothing could hide the deep confusion and dread etched across his features. The boy didn't understand exactly what was happening, but he knew it wasn't good. Round him, townspeople gathered like vultures drawn to a fresh kill. They leaned against wagons and crates, chewing on straw, laughing, muttering things he couldn't fully hear. Some stood in silence, eyes cast downward, too cowardly to intervene, but too curious to walk away. Others, men with heavy boots and cruel eyes, watched with interest. Women clutched their shawls tighter and looked away, pretending this wasn't real, that the boy on the platform wasn't someone's son, but he was, or had been. Once he had been taken 2 weeks ago. The orphanage had burned in the night. No one knew if it was lightning or sabotage, but the fire consumed everything. He remembered the smoke filling his lungs, the heat against his skin, the screaming he had escaped through a broken window, barefoot and coughing, only to be grabbed the next morning by 2 men who claimed to be rescuers. They offered no comfort, no food, no water, just shackles and silence. They loaded him onto a wagon and drove 4 miles, avoiding questions and beating him if he tried to speak. He had hoped for help. What he found was a marketplace of misery. Now, he stood on display like livestock, his innocence sold to the highest bidder. The word virgin had been spoken in hushed, greedy tones, by the man who dragged him here, a cruel-faced merchant with gold rings and rotting teeth. The boy didn't fully grasp the meaning, but he sensed it carried a weight of shame and threat. The auctioneer, a fat man with a booming voice and no soul in his eyes, barked out numbers like he was selling cattle. 10 silver for the buoyant, touched, strong, obedient. Do I hear 12? 13. The boy's chest tightened as each call brought another glance from another stranger. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the square, making the boy feel even smaller. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his lips were cracked from thirst. His knees threatened to buckle, but he stood tall, if only out of spite. He would not cry, not in front of them. Not when they wanted him to look broken. He searched the faces, in the crowd, for anyone with a trace of compassion, a soft gaze, a clenched jaw, a spark of humanity. But no one met his eyes. No one came forward. It was as if the entire world had agreed to forget that he was a person. Each bang of the auctioneer's stick against the wooden stand made the boy jump. The crowd responded with laughter. They found his fear entertaining. He had once dreamed of becoming a carpenter, building things with his hands, creating something solid, something lasting. That dream felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Here, he was nothing but a transaction. His name hadn't been spoken since he was captured. No one had asked. No one cared. In this moment, he didn't even know if he remembered it himself. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to disappear, trying to make his body vanish into the heat and dust. But the murmurs around him kept pulling him back. Looks healthy enough. He'd fetch more in the next county. Shame. To waste him on just one buyer. These weren't comments about a human being. They were bargaining chips, idle thoughts about a purchase. He'd been reduced to flesh and silence, and just as the auctioneer raised his hand to close the bid, going once, going twice, the boy felt his heartbeat roar in his ears. This was it, the end. Whatever came next would be worse than what had come before. Then, in the distance, came the soft, steady tap of a cane against the hard ground. The sound didn't belong. It wasn't urgent, nor cruel, just deliberate. Quiet, a pause. Heads began to turn. Even the auctioneer lowered his hand. The boy, eyes still half closed, felt the world shift. Something or someone was approaching. The sound was so out of place that, for a moment, no one understood what they were hearing. It wasn't a gunshot, or a shout, or the clatter of silver coins. It was softer than all of that, but somehow more commanding. A gentle tap, 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 slow and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of someone who feared nothing and no one. The boy, still standing on the auction block with cracked lips and hopeless eyes, opened them and glanced toward the source. From between the clustered bodies of the townspeople, a figure emerged, small, hunched, moving with the patience of someone who had seen the world burn and refused to look away. A cane struck the dry earth again. The crowd parted slightly, not out of respect, but out of surprise. No one had expected her. Widow Myra. That was her name. Though most had forgotten her first. For 10 years she had lived at the edge of town, tending her worn-out farm in silence, speaking to no one unless she had to. Her husband had died in the mines during a cave-in, and after burying him with her own 2 hands, she had vanished from town life altogether. Some said she'd gone senile, others believed she talked to ghosts. but all agreed she was harmless and stubborn and not someone who meddled in public affairs. But here she was, her cane tapping the dirt with each careful step, her boots coated with dust, and her long skirt faded with age, and where a wide straw hat shielded her from the sun, but beneath it, her weathered face was clearly visible. Her mouth was a straight line. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and startlingly alive. Not angry, not scared, just certain. People whispered her name as she passed. Mira, the widow. What's she doing here? She walked straight up to the auction block and stopped, her shadow falling across the boy's feet. He looked at her, unsure if this was another part of the spectacle or a strange mercy. She didn't smile at him. She didn't touch him. But she didn't look through him either. She saw him. That simple act, that meeting of eyes, struck him harder than any blow he'd ever taken. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The auctioneer, still gripping his stick in the air, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the bidding's already past 20 silver, he said awkwardly. This ain't no place for, I'll take him, she said quietly, but there was no mistaking her tone. It was not a question, it was not a request, it was a decision, the kind made by people who'd already lost everything and feared no consequences. "Ma'am," the auctioneer tried again, shifting his feet, clearly unsure how to challenge her. "There's procedures, a certain order, bidders, rules. I said, I'll take him," she repeated, reaching into her shawl. She pulled out a small leather pouch worn at the seams. With her gnarled fingers, she tossed it into his hand. The coins inside jingled silver, copper, even a few gold pieces. No one in the crowd breathed. The auctioneer hesitated. He looked at the boy, then at Myra, then at the crowd, hoping someone would object, protest, demand a recount of the bids. No one did. In truth, none of them had wanted the boy for anything but cruelty or profit. And while they'd taken pleasure in the spectacle, none of them had the nerve to defy the widow. Not after seeing that look in her eye. "SOL," the auctioneer muttered, lowering his stick with a sheepish nod. To the widow, a murmur rolled through the crowd. Some shrugged and walked away. Others stayed to see what would happen next. Myra didn't turn to them. She simply stepped closer to the boy and used her cane to cut the rope from his wrists. With a few flicks of her blade and old pocket knife she carried in her boot, the rope fell away. She tucked the knife back and turned to "Come," she said, without looking back. Aaron, he remembered his name, now took one step down from the platform, then another, unsure whether to run or bow or cry. But when he looked at the woman ahead of him, walking slowly but surely through the parting crowd, he knew one thing. He was not afraid. Not of her, not now. He followed her, not as property, not as livestock, but as something closer to a person. And the town, for the first time in years, watched something good happen, said nothing. The auctioneer, clearly rattled, rubbed the back of his neck as the last jingle of coins echoed in his palm. "Ma'am," he stammered, as if hoping to find a loophole in what had just happened. "Are you sure you want to spend all this on him? I mean, it ain't charity work we're running here. You sure you understand what you're—" But Myra didn't let him finish. She looked him dead in the eye. Her voice was calm, measured, but unmistakably final. "I'll take him," she said again, and this time it felt like a verdict. The kind old gods made in the hills when the world was still raw and just. She extended her hand and dropped the worn pouch into his calloused fingers. It wasn't a princely sum by the standards of the town's wealthiest, but in that bag was a decade's worth of quiet saving silver she'd earned from selling eggs, sewing repairs, and raising winter squash when no one thought the land had strength left in it. It was enough. More than enough. The crowd knew it, and so did the auctioneer, whose greedy instincts made him pocket the coins without another word. He gave the briefest nod, muttered, "Sold," to the widow, and looked away as if ashamed to have been part of something suddenly beneath him. The boy's breath caught in his chest. He didn't move. He stood frozen on the platform, the heat rising from the dirt below, the wooden boards now sticky with sweat from the soles of his feet. He stared at her, this old woman who had stepped into his nightmare and rewritten it with 3 words. He wanted to ask her why. Why him? Why now? What did she want in return? But Mira didn't give him time to ask. She stepped forward and pulled a small blade from her boot, a dull old pocketknife that looked more suited for slicing apples than cutting restraints. But with a surprising swiftness, she slashed through the rope at his wrists. It fell away in 2 pieces and hit the platform with a soft thud. She didn't touch his hands. She didn't grab his arm. She just turned, gave a small nod with her chin, and said, "Come on then." And she walked. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with purpose, her cane landing in the dirt, her boots crunching gravel, her shoulders straight despite the years etched into her bones. The boy hesitated. For the first time in days, he was unbound. He could run, into the woods, into the mountains, anywhere. But something about the way she walked, quiet, strong, not once glancing back, pulled him like a tide, not forced, just invited. He stepped off the platform and into the road. The crowd parted to let them through. No one clapped. No one cheered. Some whispered, some scoffed, and others simply turned away. as if ashamed to witness something pure in a place that had long since rotted. The boy passed by men who had nearly bought him. He saw their eyes cold, irritated, or confused. A few muttered crude jokes under their breath, but no one dared follow. No one dared challenge the widow. She was a relic, yes, but a dangerous one, like old firewood, quiet until you strike the match. They walked through the heart of the town, past the rusted well, the saloon with the leaning porch, the shuttered general store. Aaron, he remembered now, his name was Aaron, kept pace behind her, watching the sway of her braid tucked beneath her hat, the way her cane avoided every crack in the road, like she'd memorized every stone on the way home. She said nothing. Neither did he. They walked for nearly an hour, leaving the auction square, then the town, and then the last picket fences that marked the edge of so-called civilization. At a fork in the dusty road, where the hills began to rise, and wildflowers pushed up between patches of dry grass, she finally paused. "You tired?" she asked without looking back. Aaron opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. She nodded and resumed walking. That was all. No questions, no lectures, no promises. Just the path, and her back, and the space she'd made for him to walk behind her out of the dust and into something else, something quieter, something that, maybe, could be called a beginning. The farm was smaller than Aaron expected, not the grand green sprawl he'd seen in storybooks, but a crooked stretch of land pressed up against the edge of a sloping hill, the kind of place forgotten by maps and left alone by men. The path leading to it was lined with sagebrush and old fence posts leaning at odd angles, their wires rusted and sagging. Chickens pecked in the dust near a tilted coop, and a single brown cow stood beneath a weathered tree, chewing slowly as if time itself moved more gently here. The house, too, was plain white paint peeled to gray, windows patched with cloth, the porch uneven and in need of repair, and yet it breathed. It felt lived in. Real. Aaron stood just outside the gate, unsure of his place. The woman, he still didn't know what to call her, pushed the gate open with the side of her cane and walked up the path without turning around. "You coming?" she asked over her shoulder. He blinked, startled, then followed, the wooden slats creaking beneath his bare feet. Every step made him more aware of how ragged he looked, his shirt torn at the shoulder, his pants threadbare, his skin covered in dust and bruises. He expected her to comment on it, maybe point him to a pump or a shed. Instead, she opened the front door and stepped inside, letting it swing wide behind her. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something faintly sweet, maybe honey or warm bread. There was no grand sitting room, no polished floorboards or glass cabinets, just a worn table with 2 chairs, a small hearth stacked with chopped wood, and a kettle resting on the edge of a brick stove. A quilt hung over a rocking chair, frayed at the corners but clearly hand-stitched. It was the kind of home people built for use, not for show. The woman took off her hat, shook loose a braid of silver-streaked hair, and hung it on a peg near the door. She didn't speak for a while, moving about the house in silence, as if letting him adjust in his own time. Aaron hovered near the doorway, unsure if he should sit, stand, or leave altogether. He was used to orders, 2 sharp voices telling him what to do, but this strange quiet made him feel like he'd entered a world that ran on its own rules. Eventually, she pointed to a wooden bench near the wall. "Sit," he obeyed. She disappeared into a small back room and returned a minute later with a bundle of clothes, plain cotton, patched but clean, and set them beside him. "Wash first," she said, pointing to the back door. "Pumps outside. Buckets there. Soap too. Then change into these." Her voice wasn't cruel, but neither was it coddling. It was the tone of someone who had no time for performance, who measured worth in deeds, not explanations. Aaron nodded mutely and stepped out back. The water pump was stiff but working, and as the cold water splashed over his face, he felt more human than he had in weeks. He scrubbed at the dirt on his skin, wincing as the soap stung the welts and scrapes on his arms. When he dressed in the clothes she'd given him, they hung loose on his thin frame, but they were warm, and they didn't smell like fear. When he came back inside, the woman was stirring something in a pot over the fire. She glanced at him once, said nothing, then ladled stew into 2 mismatched bowls. She set one at the table, slid the other in front of him, and sat. For a long while, the only sounds were the creak of spoons and the soft crackle of the fire. The stew was simple potatoes, onion, maybe a bit of wild rabbit, but it was hot, and it filled his stomach in a way that made his chest ache. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone fed him because they wanted him alive. After the meal, she lit a lamp and looked across the table at him for the first time. Really looked. "You got a name?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Aaron," he said softly. The woman nodded once. "All right then, I'm Mara. You'll sleep in the loft tonight. Up that ladder, don't touch the rifles." And that was it. No questions about where he came from. No lectures about what she expected. No promises that things would be easy. But, for the first time in his life, Aaron felt like he might wake up in the morning and still be safe. Not owned, not hunted, just safe. And for now, that was enough. The next morning came with the smell of dew and the sound of roosters crowing through a thin morning mist. Aaron opened his eyes slowly, unsure for a moment where he was. The loft, with small bare wood, a thin mattress stuffed with straw, and a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and earth. But it was dry, warm. He lay there for a while, listening. No chains, no shouting, just birdsong, and the creak of the house settling around him like a mother's slow breath. He sat up and looked around, blinking at the soft yellow light slipping in through the cracked slats of the loft's only window. A simple ladder led down into the main room where the scent of porridge was already drifting up. He hesitated. Part of him still thought this might all vanish if he moved too fast, that the kindness might end, or worse, that it had been a dream, spun by his aching, desperate mind. But the warmth of the blanket, the smooth edge of the bowl from last night, and the firmness of the ladder beneath his hands told him this was real. Downstairs, Myra was already moving with the practiced rhythm of someone used to doing everything alone. She didn't look up when he entered, just nodded toward a second bowl of steaming oats set at the edge of the table. "Eat," she said, stirring her own. "Then work." Aaron sat and did as he was told. The porridge was plain but filling, laced with a little honey and cinnamon luxuries in a place like this. He didn't speak, neither did she, but something about the silence was easier this time. Like they'd both agreed it was okay not to explain everything just yet. After breakfast, she handed him a pair of old boots, far too big but still sturdy, and a straw hat that looked like it had seen 3 wars. "You'll help with the coop today," she said. "Fox got in last week. Fence needs mending. Eggs need gathering. Don't spook the rooster. He'll bite." She paused, then added, "Tools are in the shed. You break something, fix it. You don't know how, you ask. Don't pretend." Aaron nodded quickly, soaking up every word. He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him clear instructions that didn't involve fear or pain. He walked with her to the edge of the chicken yard, watching how she moved slow but precise, each step like a whisper to the land. The chickens scattered at her presence, but none panicked. Even the surly old rooster she warned him about its feathers and merely clucked when she passed. The fence was worse than she'd let on. A few sections had been clawed through completely, and the nails holding it together were rusted and loose. Myra showed him how to hammer the slats straight, how to reinforce the base with rocks to keep digging paws out. She didn't hover. She just watched quietly for a moment, corrected his grip once, then left him to figure it out. By mid-morning, Aaron's hands were sore and blistered. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his shoulders ached from swinging the hammer. But he didn't stop, not once, because with each nail driven, he felt something begin to stitch inside himself. He wasn't just being kept alive, here he was being trusted. At noon, Myra brought out 2 tin cups of cool water and a slice of bread, each spread with a thick layer of apple preserves. "Rest," she said simply, settling down beside the coop in the shade. For a while they sat there together, saying nothing, just listening to the rustle of wind in the trees and the lazy clucking of fed hens. Aaron glanced at her sideways. "Why'd you do it?" he asked quietly. "At the auction?" Myra didn't answer right away. She sipped her water, then leaned back against the fence. Her eyes, squinting in the sun, were unreadable. "You looked like someone who was about to disappear," she said finally. "And I've seen too many good things vanish without anyone trying to stop it." Aaron stared at the dirt between his boots. "You don't even know me." "No," she said, "not yet." He didn't reply, but his throat burned not from thirst, but from the unfamiliar tightness of emotion. For the first time, maybe ever, someone had seen him not as a thing, but as someone worth saving, not just with silver, but with effort, with belief. And belief, he realized, might be the rarest kindness of all. Weeks passed like the slow turning of a wheel, steady and silent. Aaron began to learn the rhythm of the land, not from instruction, but from watching Myra. She didn't lecture. She didn't hover over him. She showed him once, maybe twice, then expected him to try, fail, and try again. It wasn't cruelty, it was trust. And every time she handed him a task, stacking firewood, trapping moles, darning a sock, he felt a quiet pride in doing something that mattered. His hands became rough with his shoulders thickened, his walk changed. The boy who had trembled on the auction platform was still inside him, but now he carried tools instead of fear. The land asked things of him. So did the animals, so did the weather. They didn't care who he had been, they only cared if he could hold his own. Myra remained a mystery in some ways. She never spoke of family, never mentioned a husband. Her walls held no photographs, just woven baskets and dried herbs. At night, she sometimes sat in the rocking chair and stared into the fire, lips pursed like she was holding back words that had no use anymore. Once, Aaron asked her if she ever got lonely. She looked at him, brow lifted, and said, "Lonely's just noise. Quiet's a gift." And that was the end of that. But in the quiet, they grew close. Not like mother and son, not exactly. More like 2 souls who had survived something unspeakable and found shelter in each other's silence. Myra taught him how to skin a rabbit, how to sharpen a blade, how to read clouds and feel a storm in his knees. Aaron, in turn, fixed the leaning coop door, patched the barn roof, and even started a little garden behind the house, rows of beans and corn. Nothing fancy, but his. Every evening they shared supper, sometimes stew, sometimes just cornbread, and Milk Khan sat near the fire. One night, as cicadas buzzed through the open windows and the stars peeked through the dark sky, Aaron looked at her and said, "You know, I used to think I'd die before my next birthday." He didn't mean to say it. It just slipped out, like breath on a cold window. Myra didn't flinch. She just looked at him and replied, "That's what they wanted, not what the world wanted." Then, after a long pause, she added, "You're not dead, boy, you're growing." And he was, in more ways than one. The townsfolk didn't forget him. Of course, a few times a month, Myra sent him into town with a cart of eggs and fresh butter. Some shopkeepers glanced at him sideways. Some whispered. A few Muslim women gave him soft smiles or loaves of bread wrapped in cloth. But no one dared speak against him aloud. The widow's reputation held like iron. Everyone in town remembered what she had done, and none of them could quite decide if it had been madness or a kind of wild, righteous wisdom. Aaron didn't care. He wasn't there to win approval. He loaded his goods, made his trades, and returned before sunset. The land was where he belonged. Now still, some questions hung between him and Myra, questions about where he came from, who had tried to sell him, and how he had ended up alone in the first place. But Myra never pressed. She treated his silence like a wound she could see, and she gave it room to close on its own. Then one morning, after a storm had rolled through the hills and left the soil soft and fragrant, Aaron stood on the porch and watched the horizon while drinking from a tin cup. Myra stepped beside him, squinting into the distance. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He blinked. "Next? Life ain't just chores and chickens. One day you'll want more. That's natural." He looked down at the earth, then at his hands, steady now, capable. "I never thought I'd live long enough to want anything," he said softly. "But now, sometimes I think maybe I could build something, make something last." She nodded slowly. "Then we better start teaching you more than fences and feed." Aaron glanced at her, something like hope blooming in his chest. "Like what?" Myra smiled faintly, her face creasing like old leather. "Like how to live, boy. For real, this time." Autumn crept across the land like a quiet fire, leaves turning red and gold, the wind sharp with the scent of frost. The fields, once vibrant with late summer life, began to brown and bend. Myra and Aaron worked side by side to prepare the farm for the cold months ahead. They hauled firewood and patched the chimney. They sealed the chicken coop tight and moved hay into the barn loft. Days were shorter now, but Aaron no longer feared the dark. In fact, he welcomed the hush of twilight, when the animals bedded down and the house glowed with warmth and safety. One evening, as they brought in the last of the corn, Myra sat on an overturned bucket and wiped her brow. She was breathing harder than usual, and her hand trembled slightly. Aaron noticed it, but said nothing at first. Myra hated fuss. But after dinner, when she didn't touch her stew, he finally asked, "Are you all right?" She waved him off. "Just tired." But by the next morning, she hadn't come down from her room. Aaron knocked gently on her door, then pushed it open to find her sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her side and looking pale. "It's nothing," she muttered, "just the years catching up." He helped her lie back, fetched cool water, and sat beside her for hours, watching her chest rise and fall. A fever had set in, slow but unmistakable. That night, Aaron lit the fire himself and stayed awake in the rocking chair, listening for every creak upstairs. Fear returned, but it was a different kind this time, not the fear of pain or death, but the fear of losing something good, of losing her. The next day, she was worse. Aaron hitched the old mule and rode to town. It was the first time he had gone, not for eggs or butter, but for help. When he arrived, covered in dust and wild-eyed, people stared. He ignored them all, and stormed into the apothecary. "She's sick," he said, "the widow, Myra, she's burning up." Old Mr. Calder, the town's stooped and irritable herbalist, blinked at him in surprise. "You her boy now?" he asked, half mocking. Aaron's fists clenched. "She saved me, now I need to save her." The man looked at him a long moment, then reached for his satchel. "All right then, show me the way." They rode back fast. When Calder saw Myra, his face shifted from indifference to quiet concern. He brewed tinctures, gave Aaron instructions, and muttered warnings about keeping her warm and hydrated. "Her body's fighting, but she's not young. Might be 3 days, might be 10, stay close." And so Aaron did. He sat beside her bed, wiping sweat from her brow, spooning broth into her mouth when she could swallow. Sometimes she spoke in half-dreams, murmured names he didn't know, words in a language he couldn't understand. Once she said, "Tom, the wheat's gone," and wept softly. Aaron didn't ask who Tom was. He just held her hand and stayed. On the 4th night, her fever broke. She opened her eyes, looked at him with something close to recognition, and whispered, "You didn't run?" Aaron leaned forward. "I wouldn't. Not from you." She nodded faintly and let out a long breath. "Then maybe I picked right, after all." In the days that followed, she regained strength slowly. Erin cooked, cleaned, fed the animals, and read aloud to her from the single book she kept by her bedside, a battered volume of prairie tales and folk wisdom. Each night, she grew more alert, her voice returning bit by bit, but something had changed. The fire in her was dimmer now, flickering but fragile. One morning, as he helped her to the porch to sit in the sun, she reached for his hand. No, boy, she said, her voice rough but clear. I've buried everyone I ever loved, husband, brothers, even a child I lost before he could walk. Erin looked down, his fingers tightening around hers. But you, she said, you came back to life in front of me. And in doing it, you gave me one too. The wind stirred the cornfields behind them, golden and soft. Whatever happens next, she added, don't forget someone gave you a name again. You earned it. He nodded slowly, tears rising to his eyes but not falling, and I'll carry it. For both of us. They sat like that for a long time, the widow and the boy, not as strangers anymore, but as something closer than blood, chosen family. Winter arrived with a hush, blanketing the hills and fields in thick snow. The land slept beneath a layer of white, and the world slowed to a crawl. The days grew short and still. Smoke curled from Myra's chimney, a beacon in the frozen silence. Inside, the cabin was quiet, warm, and filled with the smells of wood smoke, dried herbs, and stew bubbling in the iron pot. Erin kept the fire going day and night, hauling in logs, feeding the chickens by lantern light, and checking on the mule. The boy who once flinched at every sound now moved with purpose. He belonged to the land, and it belonged to him. Myra had mostly regained her strength, though she leaned more heavily on her cane than before, and tired easily. She didn't say much about her brush with death, but Erin saw it in her eyes, how they lingered on small things. Now, the curl of steam from her tea, the sound of ice melting in the sun, the way Erin's voice had deepened in the months since the auction. She knew time was short, and she wasn't afraid of that, but she wanted to leave something behind. So one night, as they sat near the fire, she handed him a key. He looked at her, puzzled. What's this for? She gestured toward the narrow staircase, bottom drawer of my chest. Been locked for years. Erin rose slowly, the key cold in his palm. Upstairs, the drawer creaked open to reveal a leather-bound book, worn and water-stained, and a faded envelope tucked inside. The book was a journal, her journal, filled with sketches of the land, pressed flowers, lists of planting times, recipes, even a few letters never sent. The handwriting was neat, stubborn, a record of a life carved from loneliness, pain, and quiet endurance. He brought it down to her. I wrote it in case anyone ever came, she said. Didn't think anyone would, but you did. He didn't know what to say, so he sat beside. Erin opened the first page. Together, they read a few entries aloud. Some were short, simple weather notes or mentions of the harvest. Others held glimpses of a younger Myra, full of fight and fire, riding fence lines alone, talking to the wind like an old friend. One entry caught his eye. If anyone ever finds this place, I hope they come hungry and kind. I'll feed them. That's all I can offer. Erin looked up at her. You offered more than food. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw tears in her eyes. In the weeks that followed, she taught him everything she hadn't yet: how to read the stars for planting, how to preserve seeds, how to smoke meat and boil lye for soap. She made him memorize the layout of the root cellar, showed him where she stored the coins she'd saved in an old flour tin, and taught him how to stitch a wound without flinching. You'll need to know, she said, because this world doesn't care how young you are. It only cares if you're ready. One night, when the sky outside burned with stars and snow whispered against the windows, Erin stood by her chair and asked, if you could go back to that Datha auction, would you still choose me? Myra didn't hesitate. I didn't choose you, she said. I recognized you. Recognized. She nodded slowly. I saw myself in you. The part of me that was about to give up until someone didn't let me. Who didn't let you? She stared into the fire. A woman, long ago. Took me in when I was broken, fed me, same as I fed you. The world spins like that. One kindness planting the next. Erin sank into the chair across from her, heart heavy and light at once. He understood now this wasn't just a rescue. It was a relay. By spring, Myra's steps had slowed too much for chores. Her voice had thinned. She spent most days watching the garden from her chair by the window. And one morning, when the lilacs bloomed and the chickens clucked cheerfully at the rising sun, she didn't wake. Erin buried her beneath the old sycamore tree, the one she used to sit under when shelling peas. He carved a simple stone, the same way she taught him to carve fence posts. It read, Myra Holland, widow, warrior, home, and beneath that, she gave a boy back to the world. Afterward, he opened her journal and wrote the first entry in his own hand. Today, I became the keeper of this land, and I'll keep it well, for her, for me, for the next soul who might come here lost, hungry, and afraid. I'll feed them. That's what she taught me. The wind stirred through the trees like a quiet blessing. And the boy who once stood trembling on an auction block, now a man, walked back to the house that had become his.